Welcome in, everybody. Scott Callahan here on Between the Eers, and I've got my guy Christopher Hall here with me. And we're getting close to the bowl season, West Virginia's bowl game. I guess we are in bowl season, so we're going to break down that game a little bit between West Virginia and North Carolina on tomorrow's episode of Between the Eers. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about the momentum that West Virginia has maybe created here with an 8-win season, the pickups they picked up in the 24 class in high school, plus the portal additions that are going to be on the way. And it seems like this is the first time, Chris, that there's actually been a chance of something materializing here with Neil Brown. I'm a little skeptic, though, because, again, we kind of maybe sensed it a little bit in 2020 when they went 6-4. They won the Liberty Bowl. But there was reasons to really be kind of skeptic there because you really didn't have core pieces to really build around going into 21. This is a much different situation because you have three high-level freshmen in Gallagher, Ray, and Jaheim White that are going to be leading this team. You have a star quarterback in Garrett Green. It just feels like there's something there. Do you feel like West Virginia just might actually be back?
The question is back to what? Exactly.
Back to relevance. How about that?
Okay. I don't know I mean, you can say they were somewhat relevant under Dana, especially 2018 going into that season, but they are kind of turning the corner. A lot has to do with Country Roads Trust, how this college football landscape has changed so much, with NIL and the transfer portal and after 2020, you mentioned like, hey, they looked like they were starting to turn the corner. That was a young team. They had to kind of rebuild the roster, but then the portal thing,
There's the
and
South Carolina rumors that are popping up about Neil. Like,
yeah, like the NIL era kind of came in, and you just kind of seen young talent being plucked away from West Virginia, and they could never, they're still kind of reeling defensively. We talked about it on the recruiting show, like look how many guys had to go get in the portal. It's just they haven't had depth. They went in thin this past season, and you're kind of looking at they still might be thin defensively next year, even with the additions. So yeah, I think they are turning a corner. I don't know back to if you want to say back to an 8-win season regularly, yeah. Um, but they have a chance to probably do something special next year. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of national media members or people from different outlets that have West Virginia as a dark horse or even as a contender for the Big 12 championship. And when you got a guy like Garrett Green that signal that's starting and had the year that he had, you expect more progression and even a better year with all the tools that he's going to have returning around him. So, yeah, I think they can start turning their corner next year. I'm not as high, maybe going into next year as others, just because you look at the schedule. You start off with Penn State again, like injury. You're going to get beat up again next year, and we're already talking about depth on the defensive side. So I know a lot of people can get excited for 10, maybe 11 wins season next year, but for me, it's just pump the brakes. Like they
well,
have yet to show consistency offensively, especially on receivers. Like there's still a lot of question marks. Like you got to get that 1,000-yard rusher back, right? Like I know CJ and Jaheim, I think they combined for over 1,500 yards. But you've yet to have a 1,000-yard receiver. So there's still a lot of questions. You're going to replace someone like Zach Frazier, who was the leader of that offensive line. Don't accept a big drop off offensive line, but losing a guy like that in the locker room is going to be big. So, and then you look at the defense, like you're going to lose Lakoba. Like he was the leader of the defense. The jury's still out on Aubrey Burks. You lose Beanie Bishop. So, yeah, there's still a lot of pieces that they got to put together, and it's got to all fit together in spring ball and ride that in a fall camp. And August is a long way. A lot of things can happen. A lot of people
yeah.
can still depart. Like it's far from over. We're just at the beginning stages of the off season, and a lot of things can happen. A lot of guys can get offered a lot more money, and all of a sudden you're looking at the roster like, okay, who's going to step up? So to me, it's way too early. Until they get on campus and they start practice, and then you kind of have your team. But yeah, they've got a lot of great momentum. I think it's the first time under Neil Brown where he's had a chance to retain his roster for back-to-back seasons. So you can feel the momentum. I know the recruiting rankings weren't high, but there's a lot of potential down the future for those kids. So it's kind of a wait and see for me on will they'll be back to relevance and a contender for the Big 12, I guess. It's just really a wait and see. I'm not really high on saying, hey, everything's fine. We still don't know what Neil Brown can do when they have expectations because they haven't had expectations going into a season yet, but just because they haven't had to be able to put it all together.
Yeah, and I think too, everyone just kind of assumes the roster is going to be set here in a couple of weeks once these portal additions come in. That's not necessarily the case. Like we've seen the work that the trust has done to help kind of provide opportunities that'll keep players here, and you'll see the commitment announcements that they're putting out, but that doesn't really mean anything, right? Because these aren't binding contracts. It's not to where if they commit, they absolutely have to stay there. This isn't like the NFL. This is more like a verbal commit more than anything, and we know how those work in the high school ranks. So when you start adding money and all these other opportunities to the table, anything can change at the flip of a hat. And I think we're going to see it at some point. It may not be this year. It may not be several pieces, but it might be one or two guys. And you start to really question what do these commitments to the trust really mean and all that other stuff. So, although it looks good now, you have all these guys committed to the trust. We'll see how many actually play it out. And when we get to fall camp, how many of them are still actually there. If that's the case and they are there, I think they do have a good chance because you saw what they did this year, winning 8 games. A lot of these kids were pups. They were just kind of getting their feet wet. They really didn't have a full grasp of anything. They were kind of figuring things out as they went. Jaheim White really didn't even get heavy, reps until the end of the season. Same with Traylon Ray. Rodney Gallagher was kind of sporadic until the end of the season. I think those guys having a full offseason, they kind of feel like they're the guys now. They can kind of take ownership of that. And I think it's going to be beneficial for them. And I think it'll be beneficial for Garrett too, because now he's going into an offseason where he knows he's 100% the guy. He's had success and he's one of the top quarterbacks returning next year in the country. So I think that it does provide an opportunity to really blossom into something here. I think really, if you win next year, that to me is when you kind of get the okay on Neil Brown. Like he's your guy because if you take a step back from an 8 or potentially 9 win season, I mean, do you feel like there's enough confidence there that he can get back to that and then some? Because I feel like if he takes a step back from 8 wins, everyone's going to be right back in the same boat again as they were entering this season and questioning whether he was the right guy or not.
I mean, so much of that depends on how the season plays out. You're playing 11 Power Five. You're going to play a good Penn State team that's going to spend its whole entire offseason trying to stop Garrett Green. How much is he going to progress this offseason? How much, has Hudson Clement peaked? If he peaked, that's a problem because he
Yeah.
can't get off. He can't get off press coverage. I mean, you're looking at freshmen that's going to have to gain a lot of strength in this
And
offseason to get off
sophomore slumps are
press
very
coverage.
real.
Yes, and there's a reason for sophomore slumps because the success they had their freshman year doesn't necessarily transfer over to sophomore year because again you're going to have 11 Power Five defense coordinators looking to stop them,
Does that apply
and
with Garrett too? Now that he's
absolutely applies to
entering in
Gary
year
Green.
two,
Because again you're going to have 11 Power Five defensive coordinators trying to slow him down and trying to take away what he does best. So where he improves this offseason is going to be a key factor, and one of those areas is just having trust in the receiver to beat him. Now, he did that at times where he anticipated receivers, but you got to find consistency and you got to get consistency at receiver play for that to happen. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done offensively. And then you have to worry about Jaheim White. Same thing. If they take away his strengths, where did he improve in other areas to be able to, not just replicate, but improve on what he did this past season. So to me, it's still a young team. A lot of those skill positions they're still young, and then you have the transfers that are coming in that are going to have to find their way as well. So it's a work in progress. I'm more on the lines of you're probably repeating um, the same win loss total from this year because you just haven't had seen the consistency. And then if you offense and defense both have a bad game that week where the defense can't pick up the offense slack and vice versa, that's probably going to be a loss. So it's all about consistency at this level. And you got to get better consistency at a defense. And a lot of that just has to do with depth. If you don't have the depth, you're going to lack consistency. And you can probably find that on the offensive end as well with the receiver. So there's still a lot of work to be done. I know it's exciting, and I'm probably being a Debbie Downer at this point, but
Hey, you were the
um, it,
optimistic one all year anyway. So
yeah, so I was optimistic on this year, and we don't know what the rest of the Big 12, just like we don't know the final roster of West Virginia, we don't know what the rest of the Big 12 is going to look like. Like Penn State may not even be that good coming into next season, even though they're bringing their quarterback back next year,
another
right? So
thing to keep in mind now, there's the two-time transfer thing is out. We're all talking about that in basketball, but football, you really didn't think about it because we're in the middle of basketball season. So some of these guys that transfer to West Virginia, if they have played well, like I'm not going to name guys, but you know who those transfers that play well, they may get opportunities elsewhere and they may jump again. So that's another thing to consider. Last thing I do want to ask, how much do you feel a bowl win will actually help what they can do in the offseason in that and carrying that momentum into 24? Or does it
a,
even
a bunch. It doesn't matter. I've been people have tried to convince me like West Virginia, if West Virginia wins, it doesn't matter because all the opt-outs, yada, yada, yada. But it matters. It matters a whole lot because you see it, everyone wants to downplay bowl games. There's too many bowl games, but every bowl game I've watched, the kids are excited to play. It's a lot of fun. It's been, fairly good football. So I'm always like take the bowl wins when you can. Like, especially if you're West Virginia. It's not like there's a history of just dominating bowl games by any stretch of the imagination. So take what you can. And of course, if they lose, that hurts your momentum, right? With all the bowl opt-outs, you're expected to win, you're favored to win. That's going to kill your momentum. It also can, someone like Garrett Green, that can provide a lot of motivation. It may actually help him better if they lose. If he has a bad game, he's going to come out pretty pissed to start the season. You saw
yeah.
that after the Oklahoma game against Cincinnati. He just came in really focused and played his tail off, and he played his tail off the final two games. So you always wonder how they handle success. They did not handle success this past season when they had opportunities to maybe further, add to that win total against some teams, and they didn't handle success well. So that's something that they're going to have to really work on this offseason. And if you go in overconfident, Penn State will humble you rather quickly. And how do they handle it after that? If you lose to Penn State at home with everything, saw it in '98 when Ohio State was coming to town with that team with Amos Way and Mark Bulger. They lost that first game and kind of that humbled them pretty good because Ohio State was really good that year. So there's a lot of ifs, ands, and whats coming up next season. You expect someone like Garrett Green to be a good leader. He's been a great leader in that locker room, but it is such a long off season anymore. Day to day, you just never know what college football and the NCAA is going to bring you next. So I'm optimistic in a sense that they're moving in the right direction, but schedule is brutal. And when you start off like Penn State, as good as defense that they've had and the coaching staff that they have, they can expose you in week one. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, everyone's going to follow that blueprint, and you could really find yourself in a hole early. And then add everything else that could go along with season. So I'm more of let's wait and see. I do like the direction of the program. I've always liked Neil Brown and his staff, what they've done in practice, because I always use Chad Scott as an example because it's kind of where you start when you walk on the practice field. When you see what he's coaching these kids to do, implementing in the game works every single time. Every single time. It's like clockwork. So you can go down the list of the coaching staff and how they implement the fundamentals within their scheme, and when they do what their coach should do, they have success. So I always feel confident in what they're coaching. It's just a matter of a level of buy-in, which seems to be happening at a really high rate, and just the way the culture is, it's going in the right direction. But there's so much that goes into a season with injuries, catching teams kind of at the right time. How are they reacting that week from a win or a loss, and how there's just so much that goes into it. But West Virginia needs to really start to get where they're dictating the tempo, dictating on the outcomes on Saturdays. That's the level they need to get. But you're still working with a lot of young talent at the skill positions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to insult the intelligence or sound like I'm coming off as such of prospective transfers, right? But I mean, even us, if you tell us Arizona went 9-3 this year, which they did, I'm not going to sit there and say, well, yeah, but this happened and that happened. And they really had this kind of a schedule. And I'm sitting here thinking, damn, Arizona had a good year. Like,
If you watched Arizona, that's a program on the rise, and
yeah,
that's a program also that hey, may not match their win total next year, but it doesn't necessarily mean they took a step back.
yeah.
They're a work in progress as well. So
And it's a place West Virginia's going to have
there's
to
a
play
lot
next
of good young there's a lot of good coaches that are building their programs right now. And then you look at someone like Texas Tech, just had back-to-back top 25 classes. We know what Oklahoma State does. Like, just go down the list of Big 12 schools that West Virginia struggled against as well. There's a lot of again, there's a lot more questions and answers heading into next season.
Yeah, like I said, I don't want to insult the intelligence or transfers, but I don't think any of them are really going to dissect West Virginia's schedule when they look at it. If they go back and see that they won 9 games and said, yeah, well, Carolina, they held out a bunch of guys skipped the bowl game, they didn't have the full complement of their roster. No one's going to pay attention to that. If you have a 9-win season, that's gonna hold a lot of weight, and I think we've already seen what an 8-win season can do because I've personally talked to these transfers myself, and a lot of them have said that they really believe this is kind of like the first step into becoming a contender in the Big 12. So we'll see. I think it's going to be interesting how not only the bowl game goes, but to see how the result of the bowl game carries into the offseason. So we're going to talk about that bowl game tomorrow here on Between the Ears. We thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube at Mountaineers Now and give us a follow on X at the same handle. For Christopher Hall, I'm Skylar Callahan. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be back here tomorrow night.